Hello, so I wanted to do a video, and I think this is a requested one by one or two people. What's the difference between original camo, if you want to call it that, or traditional camouflage, and digital camo? And this is something that I would have gotten this wrong if I was just to give you my simple answer until I did a lot of research into this. You get lots of conflicting information, but then again, like with most of this stuff, you find something that sort of rings true in lots of answers, so you dive a bit deeper into that and then you start to find the real truth of it. So something like this, the Swiss Alpenflage, is a traditional camouflage. Somebody would have painted this by hand or drawn it by hand, picking colours they thought that were in the environment, except not black, as we always point out with these camouflages, but whatever. They'd have painted a pattern on probably like a certain square piece of material, and what would happen is then that would go to different factories that printed uniforms, and they would basically set that pattern up to repeatedly print onto uniforms. So on some uniforms you can look at it and you can notice that every so often the pattern repeats. Now of course they could have done that on a bigger or smaller size sample, so what you might have is the same pattern repeating more or less frequently depending on how big amounts of cloth they printed it on before it was made into uniforms. So ideally you'd want a bigger sample size so you don't see a very small pattern repeating over and over, because then it's more likely to be recognised as a camouflage pattern and not a bit of nature. But again, that's how it used to be done. You used to have somebody draw up a camouflage design by picking colours they thought would be in the environment the camo should be used in. It was then printed on big bits of material and made into uniforms. So what changed? Well, basically there was this idea that they wanted camouflages that were made by a computer, rather than the person, or a person would oversee some of it, but the computer would actually pick the best colours. And as far as I'm aware, what they did was they fed lots of different pictures through programs, and they would pick out the average colours in them. So I assume they were lots and lots of photos of woodland or like fields and things like that, and then variations of greens, I guess, would be picked out, and browns by the computer. And very early digital camouflages tended to look very pixelated, and the problem is lots of people, when they think digital camo, they think pixel camo, which isn't actually the same thing. So here's my thing that's in knockoff Marpat, which is the US Marine Camouflage, which is very early digital camo. And as you can see, you've got a shade of brown, what's probably a shade of grey in there, or white, a shade of black and a shade of green primarily, and it's quite blocky. It looks like pixels. It's like Minecraft-y sort of camo. So that was that. Now, as I said, the problem is that's pixelated. It starts off with CAD-PAT, as far as I'm aware, being the first digital camouflage. Again, there might be stuff that precedes that. Then Marpat was the US Marines version of CAD-PAT, basically a different colour palette, but very much a similar sort of print. Then you had the one that was known as the failed camouflage, which was UCP, Universal Combat Pattern, I think was the name, or Universal Camouflage Pattern. Most people know it as ACU, but that's correct, that's Army Combat Uniform. But that was the one that was different shades of grey, and for whatever reason they thought all these shades of grey would look, better than anything else for a camo. Well, not really. Some people have told me, which is interesting, that UCP is very good if you roll around in the dirt for a while, and then it picks up some of your natural environment colours on top of the grey. But the problem is that you want a camo that, when you get it ready to wear, it's a working camouflage pattern, not something that you have a camo and then in the field you need to roll around for ages to pick up the colours. So UCP was kind of a failure, and lots of people consider digital camo a failure because of that, but not really. I think the people just designing UCP didn't really know what they were doing, in the nicest way possible, or what they'd been asked to do wasn't really what would have been best for a camouflage. So UCP was considered a failure by the US Army as well, and then they eventually got rid of it. What they went to is Multicam, which I'll show you, because Multicam, or I've got the British version MTP, which is almost the same thing. Multicam's kind of when you're actually using a computer to its full advantage to make a camo. So despite what you might think, Multicam is actually a digital camouflage. Okay, so now we have MTP, which is multi-terrain pattern, which is basically the British version of Multicam. Now hopefully you're going to start being able to see with this why this is a digital camouflage. Because if you look at the colours in this isn't just simply several colours. What I'll do is I'll pan down slightly. Then you can hopefully see it. Now hopefully from looking at this you can notice there's lots of different shades of brown and green. It's not just one shade of brown, or one or two shades of brown, one or two shades of green. No, it's several shades. Now this camouflage is primarily brown and green, It has this kind of cream colour that's not quite white as the lightest colour. The darkest colour is some of the browns on here. This has no black in it, because obviously they'd learned by this stage that really you don't put black in camouflages, because the colour black doesn't really occur in nature except for some very explicit, incidents where it does. So if you're making a general kind of all-round terrain camouflage, you pick the colours that are most often used. And I'm wondering if this was fed through a computer, if it actually didn't pick black for that reason, because it was looking at the pictures and the computer thought there's no black in these photos, so why am I going to put it in the camo? So as far as I'm aware, with MTP and Multicam, the idea was, and I said this is basically, or as far as I'm aware, where Britain bought the rights to use Multicam, but then the colours were, changed slightly, and some of the patterns were changed to be more like DPM rather than the Multicam style one. So basically, what the idea was behind these camos is you fed lots of pictures, I think, of deserts and oasis and probably woodlands and everything else through a computer. Now that computer then started picking on average what colours it saw the most, and then it started doing things to blend it into each other. So you'll notice there's lots of gradients on this, as well as lots of bits where the colours are suddenly jarring. And that's important because the gradients, if you're up close with the micro patterns, that's very good for somebody not noticing something that's out of place. But at a distance, you want more bits where the colours basically go from one more solid colour to another solid colour, like there and there. The reason being is at a distance that's what breaks your outline up a lot more, because that confuses the eye into thinking there's several objects there or things at several different distances rather than the humanoid figure there with the camouflage on. So hopefully what you can see on this compared to something like Marpat is there's a much more extreme variety of colours. I think if you look up online you can find out just how many colours are in these camouflages, and it's a lot. It's something like 70 colours, or it might even be more than that, rather than it being like 4 colours with lots of camouflages. So as you can see, compared to Marpat, there's a lot more colours in this, and I know this is a knockoff of Marpat, not actual Marpat, but that should give you the impression. So the thing to take in mind with digital camouflage is it's not designed by hand, it's designed by a computer program from every sort of reliable source I could find that does lots of number crunching and works out what colours it should be using, what percentage of the camo should be what colours, and things like that. Often it's looking at photos and it's trying to work out, what colours and shapes it sees the most in there to make into a camouflage. So if we're to compare that again to a traditional camouflage like the Swiss one at the beginning, you'll be able to see how this camouflage looks a lot more natural compared to something like this. Again, this is designed to be disruptive. You can compare lots and lots of light camos to light camos, but you'll generally notice that obviously digital camos like the modern ones like Multicam and MTP have obviously been designed to look a lot more realistic. Now, if I know this has got lots of red and black in it, so maybe it's not the best example, but if I was to walk along the floor and both of these were laid out next to each other on the grass, this would be the one I'd find a lot harder to notice because it looks a lot more natural, and that should very obviously come across on the video. So the point I am getting at is that basically the idea with, and you can see on my shorts as well if I put them up there, the old Belgian jigsaw one, again that's an alright camouflage, but this looks a lot more natural. This was the big thing with digital camos, obviously, was getting a computer to do the number crunching and lots of gradient stuff and everything else, so you could come up with something that looks far more realistic and good at hiding the wearer than just getting somebody to pick a few colours, paint something on a piece of fabric and then get that replicated across lots of factories. I need to at some point do a full test of MTP. In most of my camo tests I've used MTP trousers. They have worked really well. But what I want to do is use the MTP shirt and the MTP trousers a few times. Because it's spring at the moment, everything's very green. This might be a bit too yellow for it, but we'll see. It's meant to be a universal kind of camouflage. Multicam, obviously, multi-terrain pattern. It's meant to work everywhere. So we will see. But from what I have seen in lots of different environments when I've had these trousers on, like a control factor that go with this, it's been very, very impressive. The trousers blend in surprisingly well, and I think that is just because of how many colours and almost the randomness of the pattern. The eye struggles to kind of not see it as something that belongs to nature, especially if it's slightly baggy and your silhouette's not visible. Obviously, if you can imagine me stood like that at a distance next to some stuff where it helps break up my outline, you can probably see that this would be very hard to see it as a person. So hopefully that explains it. Digital camo is not pixel camo, although some pixel camos were digital camo. The point is that digital camo is made by a computer. Again, I'm glad we're moving away from the blocky square kind of digital camo, because in my opinion, there are no straight lines in nature, so you don't really have no square camos in nature. But there you go, that's what digital camo actually is, camouflage designed by a computer.